I teach at Emory University's Gosweda Business School in all the areas of leadership and management communication. I'm adjunct faculty there, which essentially means that I don't have to attend faculty meetings, which is pretty awesome. When I'm not doing that, I'm out in the world as a practitioner. I work as either an executive coach, work with companies, all about trying to make their cultures better, working with teams. And when I'm not doing that, I've got to handle the workplace therapist. So I've got a blog where I put out content. I'm on BizTalk 1190. Anything I can do to help people make work better. Because at the end of the day, work should not have to suck. It just shouldn't. It should be a source of fulfillment for us, a source of purpose for us, a source of meaning for us. It shouldn't have to suck. My entire purpose and passion in life is one singular thing, and that is to eliminate all workplace dysfunction. Everywhere, forever. So I have plenty of job security because, like I said, you can't go someplace without people stepping on toes. It just kind of happens. So we're going to talk today, a real high level, about some of the most common forms of workplace dysfunction and what you can be doing to eliminate that, prevent that, avoid that, cure that, any other kind of verb you can think of to make your workplaces better. So as we're thinking about our time together today and what time I have with you, I really got three big objectives. So our first one is we're going to talk a little bit about what is workplace dysfunction. What I found was if you try and look that up, there is no definition. So I made one up. Okay, so we'll chat about that today. The second one is we're going to spend some time thinking about practical ways to eliminate it. Some simple tactics, much better. And then finally, just like any time you have a speaker like me, you want to be sitting there asking yourself, what's one thing I can take away? What I'm going to offer you is a general menu of stuff. Okay, I'm kind of a chef cooking in the kitchen today. Offer you a big general menu of stuff. Your job is to take one thing off that menu. That's it. This would have been a good use of your first 20 minutes if you can pull one thing off this menu. That might be something you're going to think about differently, or do differently, or notice differently. Okay. So that's our working objective. So I don't teach any kind of class or session like this or talk like this without hitting a few important key principles of leadership communication, because it's just good to kind of level set some hygiene. So here's our first one. Leadership is all about answering the why questions. Management is all about the how questions. And so we know we've got to sometimes talk to people about what they need to be doing, how something needs to be get done. But as leaders, our job is to make sure we're communicating the why. So if we spend all of our time on the how and telling people how they need to do something and kind of watching people hover over them, what do we call those managers? Micromanagers, right? We don't want to be a micromanager. Now there's time and place to do that, but we really want to spend time on the why. It's interesting, if we borrow from our friends in the military, they call that commander's intent. Communicating commander's intent. Whenever there's a new mission, they communicate the why of the mission, the what of the mission, and the when of the mission. But they largely let everyone execute on the how because they know there's too many variables when they get on the battlefield. But if everyone's clear on the mission, they're going to be good to go. So that's kind of our first principle. Our second principle is equally important. In absence of communication, people always assume the worst. So whether we're talking about it in the workplace or we're talking about it at home, in absence of communication, people always assume the worst. We go to this place in our brain that's like a risk management place. We don't want to get eaten by a bear. So we try and conjure up what's the worst possible thing that could be going on. So our job as leaders is make sure we don't let that void last too long, because that's where rumors happen, often the ones that cause us a lot of challenges and problems. And then lastly, when we think about dysfunction, it's like a fungus. It lives in dark places. It lives in dark places. 50% of all workplace dysfunction could be avoided if people were clear. If they clearly communicated and clarified their expectations, 50% of it could get eliminated. And I think that's probably even true in our personal lives. I mean, think about the last time you or your significant other had a disagreement, okay? It was probably because somebody's expectations were not made, not realized, right? Somebody didn't communicate properly to somebody else. People's feelings got hurt. So if we do a really good job of clarifying expectations, we can avoid a lot of the messiness that happens. All right, so that is kind of a backdrop. We're going to dive in a little bit here, and we're going to start with a workplace dysfunction definition. So like I said, when I went through the process of trying to find one, I couldn't find one. So I said, all right, well, the world needs one, so why don't we come up with it? So here, it's a two-parter, just like any good definition. So the first part is any pattern or behavior that is limiting members of the organization from achieving what they could or should under normal conditions. Any pattern or behavior that's limiting what we could or should achieve under normal conditions. Okay, so what this could be is it could be the way we do stuff. Maybe we've got some old ways of doing things we need to change. It could be things as more specific and concrete as meetings. We're not going to spend a lot of time talking about meetings today, but meetings are an easy source of dysfunction. I was talking to a client of mine, and she works for a large university, and she told me, she's in the finance area, she said, on average, I spend 40 hours a week in meetings. In meetings for 40 hours. So when does she do her work? Before the meetings, after the meetings, right? In the business school, what we always teach is, whenever you give students, MBA students work, you always say for every 1 hour in the classroom, they should be spending 2 hours preparing or doing work for every 1 hour in the classroom. I think that's a good simple ratio as you think about meetings. For every 1 hour of meetings, make sure people have at least 2 hours to get work done, either before or after. So when that ratio tips, that's the way to think about it. But our first one here is any pattern or behavior that's limiting. Meetings is a good example of that. Second one here is any pattern or behavior that is limiting the quality of the mental or emotional health of the workplace environment. All right, so the first one is we got systems or structures that are blocking us from realizing what we could or should be doing. The second one is we got some kind of funky energy going on here that's not particularly awesome. It could be a person, it could be some kind of stress around something, emotion. I did a TED Talk back in February. It hasn't come up online yet, but I did it on the contagiousness of emotions in the workplace. Would you all agree that emotions are contagious in the workplace? Yeah, heck yeah, they are. In fact, over the last 20 years, there's been a growing body of research on that very topic. And what they found is a couple interesting things. First, negative emotions are the most contagious. Second, it's almost like a factor of 2 or 3 if it's the boss that has negative emotions, because it just kind of bleeds into the culture, okay? And third, the contagiousness of emotions is not like a yawn, it's more like a virus. So when you catch it, you keep it, and then you give it to others. Now, positive emotions can be equally contagious, not quite as contagious as negative, but they can be very powerful. So we want to make sure we're monitoring and measuring the emotional energy of the organization. And that particularly matters a lot if it's a smaller business. And we probably all have experienced at points in our career where you were working with that one person and he or she just kind of brought negative energy, but no one really wanted to let her go or let him go because they just seemed too valuable. But the moment they left the business, there was just this deep sigh of relief. Do you all ever experience that before? Yeah, right? And that's hard to measure, but we can feel it. So workplace dysfunction can come in that form too. It can come in that form too. So that is kind of our working definition. We're going to go down the path of 3 big, broad categories. So as a tax professor I had years ago used to say, this class is going to be a mile long and an inch deep. So my conversation with us today is going to be a mile long and an inch deep, because we're just going to hit the broad buckets and give you a few tactics with our limited time together. So the first one is we got organizational cultural dysfunction, right? So we got dysfunction, it's more at the culture level. Okay, the second one is at the team level. So this team's kind of broken, it's not really working right, not sure what's going on here. And the last one is at the individual level. So we've got this one person, and for whatever reason, they're not sharing their toys in the sandbox very well. And we need to get them to share their toys a little bit better. On the organizational culture dysfunction one, if we're finding ourselves in a situation where we've got some challenges around that, the starting place for it is always leadership. One of the best ways to do it is get leaders to identify a set of common values and expectations, really kind of get clarity around that. One of our speakers later today will spend some more time on that, but that's a great starting place. Really sit down and say, okay, what do we want our culture to be? Clarify that. And then coach leadership to message those values and expectations regularly. We've got to make sure we're talking about it a lot. Okay, you've got to be talking about it a lot. And then lastly, identify the trust gap and coach towards it. So if people aren't trusting us, or if there's a brokenness there for whatever reason, identify where it is and see us a little bit more. I think this is a nice. So trust is, so we got to put on our kind of high school math class hats for a minute here, okay? It's authenticity plus vulnerability multiplied times credibility, that gets us trust. That gets us trust. Okay, so it's no accident there's a multiplication symbol in the middle there. Why is there a multiplication symbol there? Why didn't I just say, hey, you just add them all up. Add them all up, you get trust. Why does it matter if there's a multiplication symbol there? What do you think? Well, what happens if credibility goes to 0? Trust goes to 0, right? How about authenticity, vulnerability? If it goes to 0, trust goes to 0. So the piece that's important in this for us to take away is, as leaders, we got to make sure we bring credibility so people know they can rely on us. There's a dependability, reliability, predictability. There's a recent study asking the question of what's the worst kind of boss to work for. Came out about three weeks ago. And the number one worst kind of boss is not the one who's negative all the time. It's the one who's unpredictable. The one who's unpredictable, because you never know what you're going to get that day. Okay? They could be having a wonderful day and it's a party, or the next day someone's going to get fired. Okay? The level of bipolar mania that it puts into the culture is not good, right? Not good. So credibility, predictability, there's something to be said for that. And then authenticity, vulnerability, the ability to be able to be transparent, really connect with people. I call that professional intimacy, right? You're being able to build better relationships in the workplace. So if we move down that path a little bit more, one of the best ways to do this, and I preach this for every leader that I coach, is this idea of balanced feedback. So for 30 years, there's been research done on high-performing teams. And what they found is in the highest-performing teams, those teams give each other positive to negative feedback at a ratio of 5 to 1. 5 positive for every 1 negative, okay? Really high bar to hit, folks. Really high bar to hit. Now, it's interesting, if you look at that ratio, if you look at it through a different lens, the Gottman Institute studies marriages and personal relationships around the globe. And what they find is in the healthiest relationships, those couples that have been together for a very long time, when they study them, they give each other positive to negative feedback at a ratio of 5 to 1. Exactly the same ratio. And a third piece of research studying children with behavioral disorders, they found the best way to help kids overcome behavioral disorders is give them positive to negative feedback at a ratio of, actually 4 to 1. But it's close. But what I love here is we're getting a life truth. This is less about just workplace as it is about, if we want people to walk with us for a long period of time and change their behavior, we've got to be giving more positive than negative. Now, to that point, researchers a few years ago studied how weighty is negative feedback. Would we agree that negative feedback carries more of a punch than positive feedback? Yeah, it does. It carries 3 times more of a punch. So if you want to break even here, 3 to 1. 3 to 1 is baseline. Got to make sure we're giving at least 3 positive for every 1 negative to break even on this. All right, so that's all things we can do at the culture level to start to really infuse more positive energy into it. At the team level, there's also a way we can look at this. Whenever I go into any organization or work with any team, I have a back of the envelope litmus test that I do to try and gauge. All right, well, so how are things going here? What's going on here? And so this is what I look for. And you can do this both at the overall organization level or more specifically the team level. You want to avoid dysfunction at your team, you need these 3 things. First one, are roles clearly defined? Okay, really important. Now, this is hard if you're in an entrepreneurial environment because people wear lots of different hats. Totally get that. But the problem with wearing lots of hats is ultimately you're going to play in somebody else's sandbox or step on somebody else's toes. You might not mean to, but you will. So roles clearly defined. Second, are there clear expectations? Clear expectations, very, very important. Have we made it really, really clear on what we expect, what we need to see, both from the person as well as the team? And then third, is there balanced feedback? Goes back to my ratio of 5 to 1. So when I'm sitting there watching teams and they're interacting with each other, I'm noticing, are they just pounding on each other or are they actually affirming the stuff that's working? Because you want to see both realigning and some healthy critiquing, but you want to see that positive affirmation too. So a good way for you to think about, are our roles clearly defined, are expectations clearly getting communicated, and is there balanced feedback? It's one of the reasons why in the nonprofit space, dysfunction can pop up a little more often than in corporate world, because you often don't have roles clearly defined, and sometimes the expectations aren't clearly labeled. So we do lots of great work, we've got strong missions and purpose, but one person will tend to be doing a lot more work than other people and they'll get burned out. Happens all the time in the nonprofit world. And it's usually because of this. So when you get your A players getting burned out, it's likely because the roles weren't clearly defined, expectations weren't clearly communicated, and the person who kind of took the most ownership naturally did all the work until they burned out and left. And we all know we can't lose our A players. They're too valuable. Additional resource around this, many of you have probably read this book, 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Pat Lencioni. Great book. Talks about making sure that we don't have these 5 things: absence of trust, fear of conflict, lack of commitment, avoidance of accountability, and then finally inattention to results. Making sure that we're not missing those as well. Okay? So that's our mini section on team. Finally, individual. So sometimes we have this one person, and boy, he or she is technically really smart and competent, but they're just not either playing nice with others, they're not sharing their toys, they're putting off this bad vibe, there's kind of a dark cloud in their department. What do we do? So these are some examples. Maybe there's no emotional composure or emotional maturity. Maybe there's no appreciation of others, no ownership or accountability, no communication, no action or performance, they're all talk. No decision making, they're indecisive. And no emotional consistency. Any of these things, when I'm going in there and working with an individual, I'm asking for these 2 questions. Do they have any fans? I hope the answer is yes. They need to have at least some fans. And how about trust? Do people trust this person? If the answer is no to both, then it really is time to part ways and invite them to find another home. But if the answer is yes to some of those, well, there's opportunity to help them shift. Now, one more final thing, a little tactical thing. I always, when I'm working with a client like this, I'll put in their action plan. You need over the next month to tell at least one direct report, either, these are the most powerful things any manager can tell another person, okay, a direct report in particular. Either I trust you or I'm proud of you. Who does not want to hear that from the person they work for? I trust you or I'm proud of you. We're proud to work with you. Okay? And it's funny because sometimes I'll put that on their action plan, and after a month they'll say, I couldn't do it. Right? That's pretty telling, huh? So if you've got an individual like this on your team, one of the best ways to tackle this, the really best way, and I've tried everything, my whole business is people change, is 360 feedback. Have someone, usually it's ideal if it's an external person just for confidentiality, have them interview the people that this person works with and have them present that. So if you've ever gone through 360 feedback process and you've ever done the electronic versions of that, you know that the real power is that one page of verbatims at the very end. Get them to do interviews so it's nothing but 15 pages of verbatims. That is like looking in the mirror. That coupled with good coaching can yield a 70% success rate in getting people to change and hold that change, which can be very valuable and worth it. So again, as we're thinking about individuals, you have to ask yourself, is this worth the resources and commitment? But if so, this can be a great way to help them kind of turn the corner and eliminate some of that dysfunction that's coming from a particular person or leader. So final thought, I love this quote from John Cotter. He says, the challenge of simple and direct communication is it requires great clarity of thought plus more than a little courage. Amen. This requires really thinking about what is it that we expect? Who are we as a company and culture? And then the courage to say it and say it again and say it again and say it again. And hold people accountable that break those rules and lift people up that honor those. That's how we end up getting in rooms like this. So with that, I would just like to thank you for letting me kick off a wonderful morning. If you have any questions or anything else I can help with, all my contact information is available to you. And enjoy not only the rest of the speakers, but this wonderful event, and congratulations to all of you. Thank you.